right? This is the CI/CD UX meeting for September 22nd. Let's see, a couple of announcements, read only. Gina shared her journey of prioritizing her work for a runner. She learned a lot. She's still ongoing process that with the Darren, her PM, and finally landed in a solid plan. So I saw some comments in Slack, but please have a look if you haven't done so and contribute with Gina async. And Will is not here, but I'm going to voice his points for research, ongoing issue with ops and enablement research. So helped analyze environment survey and put data into Dovetail. He's also wrapping up the survey for release. That's with Daniel. So Daniel, maybe you want to voice some of these things here if it's not already in your points.
Yeah, I have a point about that, so we can go over it below.
So then also jobs to be done with Nadia and with Gina. We're making use of Will. Will is not officially our researcher for CI/CD, but he has been awesome and super supportive. So Will, if you're watching this later, thanks a lot for your help. I'm happy. I think we're all happy that we have a researcher helping us out. And Katie, you're up next.
Cool. So the last 2 weeks I've been working on my onboarding issue and creating a UX scorecard for a package. So as of today, I've completed all of the tasks for both the UX scorecard and the recommendations issue. They're both linked here. So please, everyone, feel free to have a look, and I'd appreciate any feedback that you have. This has been a really great learning experience for me, and actually creating the project to simulate the workflow to follow for the UX scorecard was like the first time where anything clicked of like what is actually a package, because I was struggling a lot with the technology. So that was really helpful, and I'd like to do that with some other parts of the package project product, like the dependency proxy. And I think looking ahead towards finishing the UX scorecard, I'm getting familiar with the UX issues. I watched Gina's video back about how she prioritized the issues for her milestone. So that was really helpful and good inspiration for me. And I started the conversation today with my PM, Tim. There's quite a lot of UX issues in the backlog, but we kind of isolated 5 issues that align with the direction that the product's moving in. Those issues are quite variable in scope, and some of them are quite large. Some of them will require problem validation. So the next step is for me to dive into those issues and some of the underlying technology, such as the dependency proxy, because quite a few of them have something to do with that. I also had a good chat with Nadia about how to re-engage research and the potential for generative research. The problem validation in the package validation backlog is quite narrow in scope, and there could be an opportunity for me to learn more about the product to have a little bit of a broader scope and try to uncover any pain points that package users are facing. So yeah, after the UX scorecard, I'll be kind of looking into both the issues that Tim's pointed out and also trying to be a bit proactive with generative research and start to think ahead about when I start picking up work for the package stage. And that's me.
Katie, are you going to be recording a walkthrough for the UX scorecard?
Yes, I've recorded one. It's
okay,
it's
cool.
linked on the first issue, the UX scorecard issue.
Awesome, thanks. I'll have a look.
Cool.
All right, so thanks, Katie, for sharing. I guess I'm next on the list. So my first point is on the problem validation for the environments page, like it's mentioned by Will as well. Will just wrapped up the analysis for the survey. This link here links to the issue that has kind of copy paste from Dovetail with the main insights and the main information, but Dovetail has a little more info, so you have access to it over there as well. Design wise, a few insights that I took from the research insights were there We need a clear separation and definition between the concepts of environments and deployments on the page. Both were equally mentioned on the open questions, but deployment is really has a really small footprint on the page. It's not well defined, just a piece of information in the broader environments UI. So we definitely need to make that a little bit stronger. And then in terms of actions, a lot of what was mentioned was, I want to know what is the latest change. I want to know what is the current status or what is changing now. So also giving more impact to that on the UI as we redesign. Another point that was mentioned by users is having an easier time to start. So users need a better guidance to get started with environments and to move between the UI and the docs as well. So that relates to learnability. All in all, just over half of the respondents are satisfied with environments today. I don't think just redesigning the page will address that. It's bigger concerns of missing functionality or other pieces that have to go in there, because environment is far bigger than just the page. But that's the starting point that we're working from. Both the quant and the qualitative analysis are done, but I want to go a little bit deeper into the qualitative side of it and really go through each one of the open questions that the users responded to, cluster them together and get to some final 3 or 4 statements that really summarize what users are using that page for. And that's what's going to direct the redesign efforts the most, like looking at these 3 or 4 points. Are they being addressed by this new design, yes or no? And use that as our North Star as we do that. And then the redesign is the point below. I've already started doing some explorations based on the feedback, but still taking it easy because I don't want to just go full steam before really absorbing all this context and all this feedback. And also this effort is going in parallel with a broader effort that I'm working on with Vitica for data tables, also in pipelines and other parts of the product, and especially CI/CD. So even though I want to improve and redesign the environment stable, I also want to make sure that these improvements are well shared with other areas, and we can improve horizontally how we deal with tables and how we share how we deal with similar challenges. I see here Hayana adding a comment about Gina. So yeah, let's sync up with her as well for Runner.
Yeah, for Gina, a lot of the challenges in Runner is about consuming and managing data, and in the admin view about like hundreds of thousands of items. And there's also an effort that she'll be looking to in the upcoming milestones about improving that view. So there's an overlap there. So I think it's a moment for everyone to come together.
Yeah, I think regardless of specific use cases, or even user goals, there are some walls that we hit with regards to tables when we have too much data or too much of a specific kind of data, and these can be solved by patterns that we can then share horizontally and then apply to whatever case we need. It's still very, very fuzzy in my head, but I will share more progress soon.
Danielle, I was wondering if there's somewhere like an overview of environments in GitLab, kind of like an explanation of what these are and what are the basic things that like basic things about environments, or maybe there's a handbook page with like a category direction or something. That would be very helpful, because I'm looking at this survey and I feel like I'm lacking some foundational understanding of this concept in GitLab, and it would be helpful to have that information.
Yeah, so let me check. There was just an MR merged that created an environments management direction that is really focused on that. Let me see if I can find it. I'll add to the doc later. I also have an MR to add an environments object to the pajamas documentation. It's been lingering for a while. I have to wrap it up. And the goal for that MR was really to explain what the environment is as a concept, and then as an object, what pieces of information it has and what's connected to it. So I'll get back to it, and once it's merged, I'll also share it with you, because the goal for that is really to address your question, like what is an environment, and then go from there.
Awesome. Yeah, loop me in on your work around documenting environments as an object, because yeah, I'll talk more about it, but I'm working on documenting jobs as an object right now.
Yeah, I think those are very parallel efforts for sure.
I linked here the merge request that adds the jobs to be done for environments, Nadia, so you can have a look.
Awesome, thanks.
Thanks, Hayana. And then quickly, the last 2 points. Last milestone 14.3, I finished up the design proposal to add deployment approval and rejection on the environments page. This link goes directly to the main mockup for that. Thanks, Nadia, for the co-working session where you gave me a bunch of really good feedback on this. Really appreciate it. This was supposed to happen after we did some redesign on environments, but since it's a very, very strongly requested feature by customers, then we decided to just move ahead with it. And I'm happy we did, because it was a really good iteration. So happy to see where it goes from here. Last point, I'm working on the jobs to be done for the UXKR on release evidence. It's still going, so if you want to leave some feedback or take a look, the link is there.
All right, so I guess I'll go next. So I'm currently working on documenting the conceptual object model for jobs. So you'll see that I linked Figma here right now. I'm in the process of just mapping out all of the job attributes and actions and the different relationships between other objects. It's my first time attempting something like this for such a complex product like GitLab. So it would be great if you could have a look and see if you see any gaps, any missing relationships or attributes or actions. And I will be making an MR to add this to Pajamas soon, and there will be some collaboration on an MR. I haven't shared it with the Foundations team yet, and you'll see that there's also a discussion around how to document objects in Pajamas that Pedro started. So currently we don't have any guidelines around how this should be documented in Pajamas. We did this exercise a while back for documenting the merge request as an object, but it was like a one-off thing. And since then we haven't really repeated that process. And yeah, there's a discussion around how we should do this, what the guidelines should be. And the intention is to create a set of contribution guidelines so other designers can work on this, because creating this map for whole GitLab will definitely have to be like a shared effort by different designers. So yeah, feel free to comment on Figma when you have a chance. If you think any of the relationships are incorrect or if anything is missing. Yeah, and I will also ping you on the MR once it's ready. And another issue, yeah, Daniel, so I will have a look at your MR for environments.
Yeah, sorry, I was typing my comment, but I think it's better if I voice it first. This is really great, Nadia. Thanks for sharing. I'm not sure if the Figma file might be the better place for this, but I wonder if we can have two things. First, a small definition of what the object is, like just a small paragraph. So if someone has no context or very little context of what a job is, to prime them a little bit before they get to this graph where, like here, it shows all the little pieces of what a job is, but if you have no idea what it is, then maybe these little pieces don't add up to the whole, if you know what I mean.
Do you mean just in Figma to make it easier
could
to
be in
gather
Figma,
feedback?
but then if this is going to be in Pajamas, then maybe on the page where this graph will be shown, you'll likely have a a paragraph,
Mm,
but just explaining what a job is, where it lives, what it does, like a small
yeah,
definition. And then
definitely.
okay, once I have the small definition, then I can go down into the small details and the small data. That
Mhm.
is one idea. And the other idea, which I'm not even sure if it's possible, like all of these point to other things, right? So the job points to an environment, for example. I wonder if we could link these conceptual models together. So if I click on from the job graph into environment, I go into the environment object model. And then from there, if the environment has a merge request attached, I can click on the merge request and then go to the merge request object to, if you're exploring these objects to try and understand like the information architecture behind GitLab, then you can literally like navigate between them. That could be something that is interesting to have.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Check out this issue that I linked where the discussion is happening. These are exactly the things that we're discussing there. So how should we document it? What information should we include? Because if you have a look at how the merge request is documented as an object, we don't really talk in that page about the merge request that much. We basically just give a brief overview of what a conceptual object model is. And then we just embed Figma. That doesn't provide greater context around what an MR is and how it connects to the other objects. So I think these are really great ideas that could be really helpful.
Nadia,
That as well.
I also have a thought on that. How the foundation teams did with the merge request, right, and as an object, and also with the whole framework, is that they kept everything in Figma, and once all the DRIs or everyone that was involved, right, used the comment sections and everything, that information was done, they migrated to Pajamas. So keep that in Figma for now. I think what Daniel's suggesting might create more back and forth for you in merge requests and then going back to Figma and issues. So if you have, your framework with the information that Daniel suggested about what is a pipeline, what is a job, etc. And once you get that, move to Pajamas. Because how the process it is to get something approved and merged into Pajamas, that might take longer than expected. And in Figma, you have control of that work in progress. So keep that centralized in Figma.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that's the plan. So currently what I'm doing is I'm working on Figma and I'm gathering some feedback on what I'm documenting in Figma. And I'm also participating in the discussions with the foundations team in this issue that I linked around how we should document this, because now there's lots of like ideas up in the air. So I think once we're able to narrow down to at least some kind of MVC guideline, then I will be making an MR based on that. And another issue I have, hold on, I lost the link to it. I forgot to add it. So this issue proposes adding another retry action to trigger jobs. So trigger jobs are jobs that trigger downstream pipelines. So you can set a job to trigger a downstream pipeline, and then that downstream pipeline in return might trigger another downstream pipeline. So in large organizations that have complex pipeline setups, it's not uncommon to see a situation where you have a trigger job that triggers like tens of downstream pipelines where each pipeline triggers the next one, which makes it very difficult then if there's some failed jobs in those downstream pipelines to retry them. So you would have to navigate to each of those downstream pipelines, and you would have to either retry the whole downstream pipeline, or you have to actually go look for those failed jobs and click on retry buttons one by one. So that is just time consuming. And if you want to retry all of the downstream pipelines, it's also not very cost effective, because you don't want to be rerunning all of your pipelines if you only want to retry some of the failed jobs. So the need for those customers is to have a way to retry the failed jobs in all of those pipelines from one centralized place. And the idea is to add this action to the trigger job. in the job page. Initially, we're thinking of adding it to the pipeline graph, but there's been multiple complications with that, starting from a complexity of implementation, and generally it wouldn't fit everyone's workflow. So not everyone uses the main pipeline graph to do those actions. And also, if you are investigating a job that triggers downstream pipelines and there are some problems there, you will likely open the trigger job and have a look at the logs. So you will already be in that place where you can take that action. Yeah, so have a look. If you have any concerns about this or any suggestions for improvement, let me know. But basically the idea is to just add a split button that allows you to not only retry the trigger job itself, but retry only the failed jobs in the downstream pipeline.
Nadia, I have a question / request. Can you just quickly explain what a downstream pipeline is for those that are not familiar with the concept?
I'm also trying to pull up a handbook page or a docs page. So a downstream pipeline is a pipeline that it's like a separate pipeline triggered by your main pipeline. So another way to name it is it's a child pipeline. So you have the parent pipeline that is defined by the GitLab CI.yaml file in your project. That's your main pipeline configuration. And then you can set up some of the jobs in your main pipeline that are called trigger jobs to trigger those child pipelines. And those child pipelines run separately. So if you have a very complex setup and you need to run a bunch of different operations all at once, it's an easy way to kind of separate different tasks into like a different container. It just runs separately from it. A downstream pipeline can even be a pipeline in a different project. So you can have a trigger job that triggers a child pipeline inside your project, or it can be a pipeline in a different project, which is a multi-project pipeline. So we have this concept of downstream pipelines, and inside we have your child pipeline, which is inside your own project. So it means the file is in your project repo for that pipeline. And we have multi-project pipelines, which is a pipeline defined by a YAML file in a different project. But both of these are called downstream pipelines. I found a link here for multi-project pipelines, so I will link it.
Thanks, Nadia, for the overview. And before I finish typing my comments, I think it really exemplifies why it's so important for us to achieve that higher level not only overview, but management of an application, right? When you say a downstream pipeline is something that triggers an action in a different project or in a different group, that's what we don't have today. And in context of what Daniel was explaining before, deployments and environments, is that everything is scattered, but usually our CI/CD personas, they need like a centralized place or a view to check that and see the health and manage things across multiple projects, multiple views, etc. So thanks for voicing the concept.
Sure. Daniel, you also had some questions. Do you want to voice them?
Yes. So I was gonna ask something that you already confirmed, if the downstream pipelines can also be in the same project. But in that case, how does it work? Does a project has multiple YAML files with different names? How's that set up?
Yeah, so YAML files can have any names. And if you have a look at GitLab pipeline, we have a bunch of YAML files that define the pipeline. Right. So generally you would have your main configuration file. By default, it's called GitLab CI.yaml, but you can also give it a custom name. And it's quite common to break up your pipeline into a bunch of other files that you either include in your pipeline using the include keyword, which kind of just injects that that other YAML file into your main pipeline. So when the pipeline runs, it's as if it was all in one file. But downstream pipelines are a bit different. So when you use the trigger keyword in a job, which turns this job into a trigger job. And it looks something like trigger and a file name, or like a path to the YAML file. And that will trigger either this other pipeline as a child pipeline if it's in the same project. So it's just a YAML file in your repo, just like your main pipeline. Or it's going to be a multi-project pipeline if it's a path to a different project.
Right. Thanks for that explanation. For some reason, I thought like pipelines could only be called gitlab-ci.yaml, but that's good to know. So I could have a pipeline called deploy.yaml, and then my main pipeline just triggers that when it gets to the point where it has to deploy.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah. In fact, that's a pretty common way to set it up.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. I think Hayana's question already went, right? Talking about why it's important to have a high level view. Yeah. Right. So my other question is about the actual button, the actual mockup. So here the copy says retry the trigger job on the first option, which is the option we have today, I assume. And then the secondary one that's being added by the dropdown is retry the failed jobs in the downstream pipelines. But then the difference between the two is that the first one retries all the jobs in the downstream pipelines, while the second one only retries the failed jobs. Is that it?
So actually, currently, trigger jobs don't have any retry button.
Okay.
And that was kind of by design, because we didn't want users to, like, some organizations don't want developers to be retrying the trigger jobs, because that can trigger all of those cascading pipelines to rerun, which can be quite costly. But we've been getting requests to have that option still, because not everyone has such a complex setup, and we need to have consistent actions on all jobs. So regardless if it's a trigger job or a regular job, there should be a retry button. So that's the first thing. And here's a link for that issue. So issue for adding a retry button to trigger jobs. And then that will solve a problem where you want to retry your whole or rerun your whole downstream pipeline. So what happens is when you retry a job, it reruns the script in the job. And if it triggers a downstream pipeline, it means it will rerun the whole downstream pipeline. It will recreate a pipeline, which is necessary for some use cases when you have that pipeline consuming some artifacts, or like something needs to be regenerated in that pipeline for it to work. So retrying the failed jobs in that pipeline is not really enough. Another nuance here is that when you open the pipeline page, and if a pipeline fails, you will have the retry button. It says retry, but it actually only retries the failed jobs in that pipeline. And that is the default behavior. And I was actually not aware of it until quite recently. It's not really well documented. And from the UI, it's not really obvious, but we haven't really gotten complaints from our users about it. So I don't know, maybe it's not a problem, but basically, that's why retrying a downstream pipeline will not really solve the problem when you need to regenerate something in that pipeline, because it's only going to retry the failed jobs. It's not going to rerun certain jobs that maybe need to generate some artifacts for things to work. So that's why we want to add the retry button to a trigger job, to make it possible for you to do that without clicking into the downstream pipeline, because that way you can retry the trigger job and it will rerun the whole downstream pipeline. But there's also this very special use case for large organizations that have multiple cascading downstream pipelines, and they want to retry the failed jobs in all of those downstream pipelines. So if you click on an individual downstream pipeline and click retry there, it will retry the failed jobs only in that pipeline. It's not going to retry the failed jobs in any downstream pipelines that may be triggered by that downstream pipeline. It gets quite complex. Like it's kind of like waterfall. One pipeline triggers another, So the idea here is to provide an action on the trigger job that would retry the failed jobs in all of those downstream pipelines from one place.
So if I get it correctly, the first option, retry the trigger job just reruns the first downstream pipeline, all of its jobs. And then the second option retries the failed jobs, but then if one of those jobs is also a trigger job, it also retries that and it goes all the way down. Is that it?
Yeah, so the first option is just a basic retry action that works just like for any other job. So it's just going to rerun the job, and whatever happens, whatever scripts you have in that job is going to rerun it. In case of a trigger job, it's going to re-trigger the downstream pipeline, which recreates the downstream pipeline. And the second action, yeah, it's going to retry failed jobs in whatever downstream pipelines that trigger job triggers, basically. So it's a way to save you time, just retry the failed jobs from a single place. I'm still talking to Jackie about some complications there regarding the permissions. So we need to figure out how it's going to work when like the developer may not have access to some of those downstream pipelines. So it gets quite complex, but we need to figure out how to surface that information in case there's no permission to retry some of those jobs. But otherwise, that should solve that problem.
Right. That makes sense. Thanks for the explanation. One last point, you mentioned permissions. You might want to keep an eye out for permissions from the perspective of cost control, right? Maybe a large organization where retries would be very costly wants only some people to be able to retry. Otherwise, like cost can get out of hand. So that's another idea. I'm marked to follow the thread as well. So if anything else comes up, I can also leave feedback. But thanks for the overview.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. That's a great point regarding cost control.
Awesome discussion. Very technical, but glad that we're having this face-to-face. Awesome. Gina is not here today, so I'm gonna just voice her points. She's working on improving the navigation of Runner, actually making it consistent. So there are some changes happening at the project and group level, and she wants to cascade this to the admin view of Runner. I know that she already pinged all of you, but if you haven't given her feedback yet, telling if this change impacts your product area, right? Also in the admin view, please reply to that. And also Gina is doing job to be done interviews to define the job to be done for usability testing. But she still needs to interview at least one engineer in test. So if you know someone in your groups, test engineer QA, that Gina can interview to talk about this particular topic of usability testing, please put a name here or let her know that you can reach out to that person so that she can move forward with the interview. Anyone can think of an engineer that might be available or that it's in your group that could help? Okay, if you do, let Gina know. And she's also working on improving the location of runner registrations for tokens. So started working on the design issues and discussing technical constraints with Miguel, her front-end developer, to separate the page. Runner has a lot of small usability improvements that need to be addressed. And that's where Gina is spending most of her time today, figuring out how to align things and how to improve the patterns, improve navigation, discoverability. So if you're also looking into these topics, reach out to her because she also needs to get the context of how the personas consume the data, right, for CI/CD. So let her know. And Vitika is not here. Vitika is also on PTO for the next 2 weeks. I linked here the coverage issue. I think some of us are covering for her backups for merge requests, also check-ins on research and validation. If you have a planned time off or something happens in the upcoming days and you are assigned as a backup for Vitika, let me know so that I can update there and know which tasks need to be taken care of. And I also linked here some cool things I know Vitika is working on. So the first one, we mentioned a couple of times, the redesign, right, of the table or the investigation for the tabular visual component. I don't know how to call that. And the other one that she has been working with Pedro is to simplify strategies with auto merge. That's also changes to the merge request. Yeah, so have a look. And we are at time. My goodness. I left a question here about how these meetings are helping you. If there's anything that you would like to change or updating the format, feel free to answer async so that we can always keep these conversations productive. So any feedback is appreciated. Awesome. All right. Anything else before we close? All right. Then I'll see you later. Thanks for joining. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.